we'll start with our sleeper picks, but I do think that it's important to recognize the differences between what is a sleeper pick versus what makes it different from a breakout star.
Yeah, so I think a sleeper is a guy who is going to be a good player for this team. Maybe not necessarily be an all SEC level player, but someone who makes plays when called upon and is someone who just, especially I think in regards to the national media and the way that they're viewed, discussed all that frequently. I think these are guys that like real Georgia fans are like interested in seeing and knowing how they turn out this season.
Well, I'm going to kick us off today. And if I had a hypothetical $100 bill on the table and I said, Connor, could you take a guess at what my first one is going to be? Who would you say?
Sacovie White.
It is going to be Sacovie White. I will take any opportunity that I can to talk about him because I don't think that he's just your typical slot receiver. And seeing him in high school, super dynamic, quick, reliable hands, and I think his route running ability can create mismatches even despite the fact that he's not crazy big in size. I think he's going to be really good in short yardage situations, maybe some of those more intermediate routes. I think that the kind of versatility that Sacovie White can bring to the table and what's been an absolutely stacked wide receiver room that Georgia's been able to put together in the offseason, like the stats aren't going to be super flashy, but it's going to be a quiet impact.
Where's he from again?
He's from North Georgia, which we do say on the show that I have the North Georgia bias. I did go to South Georgia last weekend. It was lovely, but I actually think that it's not my problem with South Georgia. It's South Georgia's problem with me because I came back and got super sick.
No, that's tough. We hate to see that. That's why we respect both sides of the state here on this side of the desk. But yeah, I think Sacovie is a very interesting player going into this year. Look, it's a very deep, wide receiver room, and Sacovie is a guy who seemed like he was on the verge of earning real playing time last year. I'll be interested in seeing what he does on special teams because he is able to help out there. And I'll be interested with Zachariah Branch and being the explosive playmaker that he is. What is Georgia's appetite for using him as an every down punt returner and kick returner? And how does that eat into what they need from him as a speed guy to stretch the field? And that's maybe where you start to see some opportunities created for Sacovie White. For my first pick, I'm also going to go with a wide receiver, also in his second year on the program. But I'm going with London Humphreys. This is a guy who did a lot of different things for Georgia in the spring game. I was really impressed with him. They moved him around the field. He was great in short yardage. He was able to create explosive plays. A very good athlete, maybe underrated in that regard, and perhaps because of his skin color. But I think that with London, year two, look, he had about as awful of a break as you can have in year one, where he has that big touchdown in the first game against Clemson, gets mono that same month in September, was dealing with an injury on his hand where I think it was a broken finger at points last season, and didn't score another touchdown until that Georgia Tech game. So everything that could have gone wrong for London in year one did. Now that he's had a second year in the program, look, there's a little bit of post-hype from him, because again, the way that we just talk about the sport is those year one transfer guys that generate so much interest. But I think London is a guy who, there's a little bit of overlap with him and Dylan Bell in terms of their versatility, but I think his ability, as Kirby Smart said after the spring game, to play every wide receiver position is going to get him on the field. I'm not saying he's going to be Georgia's number one receiver this year, but I do think he's going to be a guy that, especially in regards to how we have discussed this wide receiver room so far this offseason, outproduces what people think he can do.
If I didn't take Sacovie, this is probably the same route that I would have gone because similar to Sacovie, London Humphreys is not a guy that the national media is going to be talking about. He's not going to be making headlines, but I could see him being one of those guys down the line that has like a really important third down catch or a drive that changes the course of the game, so we have a bigger appreciation for him. It's just so difficult with the wide receiver group because they're being overshadowed by all the talent that Georgia brought in from the transfer portal as well as from the 2025 class. So I like that we went wide receivers both with our first pick.
Yep.
Okay, I am going to move to the defensive side of the ball. And there can be arguments made that maybe this isn't necessarily a sleeper, but I think that sometimes you and I are even guilty of not talking enough about Raylen Wilson because there's all this excitement with CJ Allen and the experience that he brings. And then on top of that, like everybody's so excited to see what Chris Cole and Justin Williams are going to bring to the table. So maybe we don't talk about him enough. Like I immediately think of his quickness. I think in high school he ran like a sub 4.5 40. So I feel like you can really see that on the tape with Raylen. And even at a young age, when him and CJ Allen had to come in and play for the SEC championship, I think that they showed glimpses of veteran level instincts. And it's just hard because, similar to the wide receiver group, I mean, Georgia has been built upon this idea of linebacker U with Kobe Dean, Roquan Smith, Quay Walker, now Jalen Walker too. So maybe Raylen Wilson isn't that flashy linebacker that's going to be a first round pick, but he offers so much more than what we've been able to discuss and talk about on this show.
Yeah, and I would certainly say that Raylen falls into the sleeper category just because there's been, I think, a rush to anoint Chris Cole and Justin Williams, and Raylen Wilson is going to play more snaps than both of those guys. I think the thing that I've seen with Raylen when going back and watching his first 2 years at Georgia, he's been in position a lot of times to make plays. He's always just been like a step late. And to me, that's not an indictment of his athleticism, but just the game slowing down and him being able to figure things out, because I think he arrived at Georgia as more of an athlete than a finished product. And so he is a guy where in his third season now at Georgia, he's seen a lot. He's played a lot of football to this point. You hope that the game mentally really slows down for him because he's got all the athletic tools. I think he's a better athlete than CJ Allen is. And if he's able to do that and the game is able to slow down for him, this is not going to be a guy that is slept on. And it would not surprise me, especially as I think Georgia looks for guys, especially at that linebacker room, to create, disruptive plays, sacks, tackles for loss. He is a guy who has the ability, I think, to do that this coming season.
No, I think you said it best too, and that's actually something that I had in my notes about not being a finished product. I think that he has so much natural talent. They really just got to be able to hone in on that, but maybe this off season that he had, like seeing the progress that he made from year 1 to year 2, knowing the abilities that he has just naturally, I'm curious to see how much development and progress that he's made in this off season, because I expect a major jump from him.
And we talked so much about some of the issues from last year's Georgia team. A lot of it was just tackling. If he's able to improve as a tackler this year, I think that changes the way and the ceiling of this defense. I'm also going to stick defense here with my second pick, my second sleeper. And I know we said these guys might not be all SEC guys. If there's a guy on this list, or at least the one that I'm working with that I think could be, it's Xavier McLeod. Again, similar to London Humphreys, second-year transfer. Kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit last year, but I think at the end of the season, Georgia Tech, Texas, Notre Dame, those 3 games, McLeod really started to come on. I feel like the light came on for him a little bit. Another year in the program, and look, with the defensive line, it's always going to be hard to play as a year 1 guy. And the thing that really works for him, you have Warren Brinson and now Stockhouse Clara. Yes, there's a lot expected of Christian Miller. He is not a sleeper. He far does not qualify as a sleeper at this point in time with how much he's been discussed this offseason. McLeod in his second year, I'm very interested in seeing what we see from him, because Jordan Hall's an easy guy to discuss because former 5-star, third year with the program. Is it going to happen for him? McLeod did some really impressive things for me in year 1, and if he's able to make a big leap in year 2, in part because he's just getting more playing time, that's going to open up a lot of things for this Georgia defense. Now, he's a guy that I expect to be a big-time contributor, maybe even more so than the other guys we discuss here. I mean, Raylen Wilson's going to be a starter. But I think that Xavier McLeod is someone who, if he has a really great year, changes the ceiling of what this defense can be.
And last year, when it came to the defensive line, especially in the earlier part of the season, there was so much inconsistency because there was a lot of injuries. So I think maybe you had to put Xavier McLeod in a position that he probably wasn't ready for. So this is someone that I think can only benefit from time with the program. And I think having that experience, maybe even if he wasn't ready to step into that position yet, was really crucial to the impact he'll make this year.
Yeah, and McLeod was one of those guys that was injured early on last season. And so to see the improvement he made at the end of the season when he was fully ready to go, that's the most encouraging thing to me. And now that he gets that second full off season in this Georgia program, there's a reason Georgia wanted him very much as a high school recruit. He ultimately picked South Carolina. There's a reason they pursued him very aggressively when he went into the transfer portal. And I think we're going to see that this season.
All right, I'm going to stick with the defense for my last pick here. I'm going to go JaCorey Thomas.
I like this pick.
And look, there's been a lot of discussion about the safety room, KJ Bolden excluded, but you bring in 3 transfer portal players, so immediately you want to start looking at the shiny new thing. And I think that JaCorey Thomas is the sleeper because he's so versatile. They used him in so many different ways last year. So, I mean, he's not having these flashy stats that immediately draw the eye, but I think it goes back to this idea of the silent killer who's going to be able to do a lot of things for this team when there is a lot of new guys in the room.
Yeah, they bring in Zion Branch, who I'm very interested in what he brings from a physical standpoint. Jaden Harris played a lot of football at Miami. So did Adrian Maddox at UAB. JaCorey Thomas is going to start against Marshall. JaCorey Thomas is going to start against Tennessee if he's healthy. I think he's going to start against Alabama at that safety spot opposite KJ Bolden. He's a guy that's played a ton of football here. He's a guy that can play both the star and the safety position, and the versatility that he brings to the table, especially when, this is a Georgia program. I think they only have like 11 four-year players that have spent all 4 of those years at Georgia. He's one of those. We know Kirby places a premium on that. This is a guy that understands the program, understands the demand that comes with playing on the Georgia defense. And like, he's not a flashy recruit. He's not a newcomer. He's a guy who's waited his turn. This guy is somewhat of an anomaly in this day and age. And I think that he is a guy who classically fits what a sleeper is.
Yeah, I like the size and the physicality too, a little bit bigger. I've got 6 foot, a little bit over 200 pounds. This just feels like a Kirby Smart type defensive player who maybe they're going to move him around a lot, but they're going to find ways to get him involved because he has been with the program for so long.
Yeah, and look, like now Chris Smith was able to get on the field a little bit earlier and was able to have a longer career because he was able to redshirt. But you look at Chris Smith, he was a similar ranked recruit. And Chris Smith, and for my money, has had the best career of a Georgia safety that has come through Georgia. I would take his career over what Malachi Starks gave. And I'm not saying JaCorey Thomas is going to be able to do what Chris did in his senior year in 2022, where he was a first-team All-American. But a similar type player who just finds himself in the right spots and makes the right plays. That's something, especially at the safety position, that is incredibly valuable for this defense.
Bring us home.
I'm going to go with Gabe Harris.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who I think, especially because of the addition of Elo Madozie at the outside linebacker position, has been a little bit overshadowed. And in part, Gabe in his first 2 years at Georgia bounced between the defensive line and outside linebacker position. I would say he was never really a true outside linebacker for Georgia in that regard. And I think that, to me, the biggest impact that Madozie is going to have for this Georgia defense, I don't expect Madozie to come in and have 6.5 sacks year one. If he has that, Georgia is absolutely thrilled. But what it's going to allow him, what Madozie is going to allow Georgia to do, is it's going to allow them to use Gabe Harris in his most advantageous way. They're going to be able to play him wherever they want to, as opposed to pigeonholing him to that outside linebacker position. He's more of the traditional, like Sam, bigger-bodied outside linebacker, but he can and will play snaps on the defensive line for Georgia this year. He's in his 3rd year in the program. He's played a little bit, and he's going to play a lot this year for Georgia. And I think that this is one of the more important pieces on this team. And, he's been lost a little bit in the shuffle because he was recovering from labrum surgery in the spring and didn't have a full go. And now you bring in Madozie, the transfer from Army. But this is a guy who is, to me, going into the season, one of the most important pieces on this defense.
And we actually talked about him a little bit last week. He's obviously got big shoes to fill with names like Michael Williams and Jalen Walker. He doesn't have to be them. He doesn't have to be extraordinary. Just consistently good, minimal mistakes, but the value that he brings, not just to the team, but to the room, is the actual level of Georgia experience, because Elo Madozie, while he was a standout at Army, doesn't have any experience in the SEC. Georgia brings in 3 edges in the 2025 class who have no college football experience. So just even being immersed into the Georgia culture is going to be huge for him.
Just very, very different. And South Georgia standout.